In this video, I'm going to show you how to create custom filters for your collections in Glide. And these filters not only apply visually to the interface, so you can filter data accordingly using advanced filters, but they also filter the data that is exported when you use a generate CSV action. Now, the reason I'm building this or showing you how to build this is because Glide does have filters for their collections. The problem is these filters have some limitations, and they also do not filter the data that is exported when you generate a CSV from the table. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you some of the limitations of the inbuilt filtering system in Glide, and then show you how to build a fairly simple advanced filtering system that allows you to not only filter what you see visually in the app, but also filter the data that is exported. So you can export only the things you see in the collection once you've filtered it. And so we have here just an example table with example customers, and we have different statuses, whether we've contacted them, whether they're interested, or whether they have purchased. Now, the first limitation is that right now there are no filters applied. And if we wanted to filter to, for example, only the people we've contacted, we can do that. However, there is no uncontacted filter that we can create. We would have to add another column somewhere on the back end, and we would have to say, okay, if this is unchecked, then it's false, and do a whole bunch of stuff. Because what happens is when we uncheck this, it still includes all of the people that are checked. And so for most things, we need essentially three variations. We need to either ignore the filtering criteria, we need the negative of the filtering criteria, so uncontacted and contacted. So we have both, so contacted and uncontacted, uncontacted and contacted. But at the moment, we can only show all or contacted. So that's one of the first limitations. The second limitation is that now that we've filtered this data, so let's say we want only the people who we've contacted that are interested, when we export, and all we're doing here is we're using an action to generate a CSV file. And so we're exporting the source data, which is customers, and we're putting the file in our user profile so we can actually access it. When we export, this is actually exporting not what we see here, but it's going to export the full customer database. So that's the second limitation of the filtering, is that it doesn't actually filter anything on the back end. It just visually filters it on the front end. And so what we need to do is create a system that allows us to not only filter what we see, but to actually filter what's exported. Now, generally what people would do is we would set up some sort of query, and we would say, okay, let's query it so that the results are either contacted and interested. But the problem there is that we have to create many iterations of that filter to actually get the final result. So what I mean by that is if we add a column here and we query, for example, the customers, and we add a filter and we say we want contacted to be checked. So that's one report that we could export, where it doesn't matter what the interested status or the purchase status is. We only are going to export the contacted who are checked. Now, what we can do is we can make this a bit more dynamic. So we can say contacted true. And then we can, create that query again. And we can say, okay, the customers, we want the contacted to be contacted. Or we can say we want the contacted to be this row contacted. Okay. And this is going to say it's faster as a relation because we're only filtering by one criteria. But the problem here is that we cannot now say we don't care what the contacted status is, because as it stands, this is now showing all the people where contacted is true. And if we say we want this false, now it's only showing the people where contacted is false. And if we try to ignore it, it's not going to find anything because all of these have either a true or false. So we can't negate that filter we just created here. There are no results where contacted is empty. And not only that, this is just one iteration of the query column that we need. We need to establish many different iterations and do a whole bunch of workarounds to get the final result. And so we don't want that. What we want is just a simple way to filter and then to be able to export the filtered results. And so what we're going to be building is a custom set of filters where we can not only say that we want people who we've contacted that are interested, but we can also ignore whether they've purchased or not and ignore the status. Not only that, we can actually uncheck this to remove the contacted criteria from our filtering. So now it doesn't matter if they're contacted or not, we're just exporting the interested. And so this allows us to build really complex filtering without having to do too much work when it comes to adding many different query columns on the back end. Not only this, when we click export, it's going to export only the rows that we see visually, because this is going to be coming from a query column. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how this works on the back end, and then we'll do a final export and I'll show you what the result is. So in data, the collection that we want to filter is the customer table. Okay, so we have a whole bunch of different data here. And all we need to do, the first step, is to create a JSON object with the criteria that we want to use as filters. In this case, it's going to be basically everything except the name. And so what we do is we add a column called JSON object, and we're including the name anyway just for ease of use, because it doesn't actually matter. So we're creating a JSON object and we're just mapping all the columns. So we're saying name is this, status is this, contacted is this, interested is this, so on and so forth. And so what that does, just to show you how to get to this, if you search for JSON, you can see we're creating a JSON object, and then you literally just add all the values. And the end result is a little summary of our row of data. Excuse me. So we have a little summary of this row in a nice and tidy JSON object. And each row has this unique object with different criteria. So what we do next is we go to the user table or a table that you've created where you would like to apply this sort of filtering. And we create the columns that we want to filter by. So we have status, contacted, interested, and purchase. And if we have a look here, these are the columns that we want to filter. This also includes the ID and the name, but that's just for reference. It doesn't really matter. Realistically, we only want to really be able to filter by these values here. And so we match this in whatever table we're going to use to apply the filtering. In this case, it's just the user row. And so we say the filters are status, contacted, interested, and purchased. And then what we do is we create a JSON object, very similar to the previous one we just created, but this time it doesn't have the ID and the name. And we just map those, right? We create the same titles, or the keys, and we set the values as these values here. So you can see this object is currently empty because we haven't entered anything here. But if I say contacted is true, you'll see that now this JSON object has contacted as true. And if I add another one here, if I say false, now it's added false as a criteria. And you can see the filter actually adapts to what we're trying to filter by in terms of the JSON object here. So to recap, we've got a basic table and we've summarized it in a JSON object. we want to filter by these 4 columns. And so in the user table, we've just added those 4 columns and then created a JSON object that basically pulls in those values. Then what we need to do is we need to pull in all of the records that we want to filter. So we add a joined list, and we're just joining that JSON object from the customer table, and we're separating it by a comma and a new line, right? The new line is just so it looks a bit neater when we preview it. You can see that this is the first object or the first row, this is the second row, third row, so on and so forth. So we just pull in all of these objects into the user table as a joined list. And then what we're going to do is we're going to run some code. Or we're going to set up some code in a template column. And if you're part of Low Code Masters, you can just copy and paste this code. And if you're not, you can just pause and screenshot the code. But we have some code, and all this does is returns the IDs of records that match the filters that we've said we want to filter by. So this code here, it's in a template column, and we're replacing the customer JSON array, which is all those objects that we just created in the join list. We're saying this is going to be the JSON data, and then we're also pulling in the filtering criteria, which is this here. So customers is the join list, customer filters is the filters. And then all we need to do in the JavaScript column is just run that code. And what that's going to do is it's going to return a comma-separated list of all of the records that match that particular filtering criteria. So what we can do is I can show you how this works in real time. Let's say we want all the people who we've contacted that were interested and that purchased. We now have 3 items that match that criteria. In data, you can see this is true, true, and true. This is our filter data. This is our list of all of the records in the customer table. The code now contains all of the customers, and it also contains our filtering criteria. And then when we run this code in a JavaScript column, you can see there's 3 IDs that are now present. And so all we need to do now is that because we've filtered to those specific IDs, we can just run a query of the customer table, and we can say return all of the customers where their row ID is included in this row customers IDs, which is that JavaScript column that returns the IDs. So we have this query now, and the beautiful thing about this is that now we can set this collection over here as not the customer table, but the user profile customers results. So it's going to be that query. And because there was only 3 IDs, it's only returned 3 results. And what we can do is that when we export now, actions, generate CSV file, the source data is not going to be the customer table. The source of the data is going to be the customer results from the user table. And then we can set the exported file to just our user profile. But as you can see, this has now filtered it correctly. And not only that, you can actually also filter not just by Boolean, but by text. So we can set this as qualified, and we've refined it even further. And so it's only returning people who are qualified. And then to clear the filters, we can just do something like clearing those values, right, for all of the different statuses. And so we can clear it and it's returned back. And this is just a much more advanced and fairly simple way of actually getting this done. Now, there's a few things to note. One thing is it would be interesting for whoever builds this out and implements this to expand upon this and to maybe include things like date filtering or price range filtering, greater than or equal to, that sort of stuff. So that's where you can expand upon this. Right now it's just text-based, if it matches the text, and Boolean. And one thing to note about these, the choice for status is just pulling in any of the unique items from here. So if we look at status, we're going to be, the source is going to be customers, the values is going to be status, and the display as is going to be status. So what it's going to do is it's going to pull all of these and it's going to return all the unique values, and that will allow us to filter by that. And then for the true and false, just so it looks a little bit nicer on the front end, and we can say contacted yes, no, I've just created a very basic table that has the actual values we want to write here in this left column, and then the display values in the right column. And so all we're doing is, I can show you on screen, for contacted, we're writing to the source contacted filter, and the source of this is going to be the checkbox table. The values is going to be the value, and the display is going to be the display. It just looks a little bit better than false and true, but that's totally optional. You can leave it as is. I just wanted something a little bit more plain language. And so that's all we're doing. We're getting the criteria that we want to filter by. We're putting it in a JSON object here. We're getting all of these different items and we're pulling them in as a joined list. We're kind of mashing it all together in this code, right? Here's the code again. And then we're getting the result. And then all we have to do is create a query that finds all of the records where the row ID is included in that result. And we display that on screen. And that's also what we select as the source when we're exporting. So I hope that was valuable. It's a little insight into some of the more advanced stuff you can do when you learn a little bit of JavaScript. This is something that you can get ChatGPT to create. So you can just tell it that I have these items in a collection and I want to filter them by these filters, and it will create the JavaScript for you. You might take a little bit of time tweaking it, but the result you get saves you a lot of time. And as you can see, there's only one. We don't need these conditional if then else query columns that will extend on for quite a long time. All we have is one query. It's returning the records that match this, and this is generated by filtering by these filters. So I hope that was valuable. I'll see you in the next video. Thank you for watching.